Stephen A. Smith Show. Before I get on out of here, I had to talk about a story that's very, very important. And albeit indirectly,
Stephen A. Smith was sitting on the set of First Take when ESPN stopped everything, cut right into the segment, to drop a piece of news that had the entire WNBA world standing still. Angel Reese, the most talked about young player in women's basketball, was gone from the Chicago sky. Just like that, no warning, no dramatic press conference. One moment, she's Chicago's crown jewel, and the next, she's property of the Atlanta Dream. And when Stephen A. opened his mouth to react, what came out wasn't shock or outrage. It was something far more telling. He said he was very, very happy for her. That single statement said more about the state of the Chicago sky than anything their front office has said in years. And because when one of the most outspoken analysts in sports history reacts to your franchise dumping its best player with pure relief on her behalf, you have to ask what exactly was going on behind those closed locker room doors. Let's go back to where this really started, because none of this happened overnight. Angel Reese arrived in Chicago in 2024 as a generational talent. Came fresh off leading LSU to a national championship, already a household name, already a cultural icon before she'd played a single professional minute. Was Bayou Barbie. She was Vogue covers and Victoria's Secret runways and Met Gala host committees. She was the most followed player in the entire WNBA with over 4.6 million Instagram followers by early 2025, and on the court she delivered immediately. As a rookie, you sure averaged 13.6 points and 13.1 rebounds per game, broke the WNBA's all-time single-season rebounding record, and earned All-Star selection. The expectations placed on her weren't unreasonable. They were exactly what a franchise should want a young star with elite production and a cultural pull no other player in the league could match, and Chicago absolutely squandered it. The cracks started showing almost immediately. The sky were a mess from the inside out. Coaching instability, roster dysfunction, a practice facility that multiple sources described as an embarrassment, a strip mall in Deerfield, Illinois, where Reese was literally brought to meet the media on the day she was drafted. That detail alone tells you everything. Here you have a 21-year-old who just carried a program to a national title. You who had already built a brand bigger than most WNBA franchises and the organization, greeting her at a strip mall. It wasn't just disrespectful, it was a preview of what was to come. The Sky failed to build a roster capable of competing around her, cycled through coaching staff, and when things got ugly, they punished Reese for daring to say so publicly. She had 2 different coaches in her first 2 seasons alone, and by the time 2026 rolled around, she was about to get a third. Nobody wins in that environment. Nobody stays in that environment if they have a choice. By the end of her second season, Reese had done everything a player could do short of winning by herself. She defended her rebounding crown, or averaging 12.6 boards per game, making her the only player in WNBA history to average at least 12.00 rebounds per game in back-to-back seasons. She led the Sky in scoring with 14.7 points per game. She racked up 23 double-doubles, the most in the league. She became the fastest player to ever hit 500 career points and 500 career rebounds, doing it in just 38 games. She became only the 3rd fastest player in WNBA history to record a triple-double. The numbers were historic. The team was not. Chicago finished the 2025 season 10-34. They went 1-13 in games she didn't play, missing the playoffs for the second straight year. The organization had failed to give her even a marginally competitive team to work with, and they somehow expected everything to just work out. It didn't, and Reese was done pretending it could. Sad that September interview with the Chicago Tribune was the beginning of the end. Reese sat down and told the world exactly what she was thinking, and she didn't soften a single word of it. She said she was not settling for the same and that the team had to get great players, not good players, great ones, or she would do what was best for her. She was 22 years old and already done giving the organization the benefit of the doubt. What happened next was almost unbelievable. Instead of treating her honesty as a wake-up call, instead of rallying around their franchise player and making the changes she was asking for, the Chicago Sky suspended her for publicly calling them out. A half-aim suspension, not for a dirty play or a violation of league rules, but for having the audacity to demand a winning environment. And that was the moment every fan and every observer who was paying attention understood. The Sky didn't deserve Angel Reese, and the feeling was mutual. Front office's dysfunction went deeper than just the suspension. They had already fired Teresa Weatherspoon, the one coach Reese had genuinely trusted, the one coach who seemed to understand how to get the best out of her. Before Weatherspoon, there was another staff entirely, and now heading into 2026, the Sky were preparing to install a third head coach in as many years for a 23-year-old franchise centerpiece. 3 coaches, 2 playoff misses, a roster that fell apart every single time it was tested. And through all of it, Reese showed up. She put up historic numbers on a losing team, kept her brand growing more, and stayed professional in public, even when the organization was making decisions that made absolutely no sense. The fans in Chicago weren't blind to it. When the trade finally dropped, the reaction was immediate and brutal. Franchise malpractice was one of the kinder descriptions. One fan wrote, "We were only here for Angel." Another said, "The Sky had just lost 90% of their viewership." Matthew Cherry, a former NFL player from Chicago who is now a filmmaker in LA, had 2 words for the front office: sell the team. The trade itself was announced Monday, April 6, 2026, officially the day WNBA free agency opened, and the terms are what sparked so much outrage among the Sky's already frustrated fan base. Chicago received 2 first-round picks, one in 2027, one in 2028, plus 2028 second-round swap rights. That's it. For a 2-time All-Star, for a 2-time rebounding champion, for the most culturally influential player in the history of the franchise, possibly in the history of the entire league. 2 future draft picks. Now the argument from the front office is that Reese was in the final guaranteed year of her rookie contract, that her long-term commitment to Chicago was far from certain, and that this was about roster balance. Their words. But let's be clear about what roster balance means in this context. The Sky couldn't keep her happy, couldn't build around her. Rather than make the investment required to do so, they cashed her in before she could walk. The smart play for them, maybe, but a gut punch for everyone who believed in what she could become in that city. And here's the part that makes the Chicago side of this story even harder to defend. While the Sky were handing over their most valuable asset for a couple of late-round draft picks and calling it a strategic rebuild, the rest of the basketball world was reacting to the news like Atlanta had just pulled off the heist of the decade. Dream General Manager Dan Padover called Reese a dynamic talent and a perfect fit. Former WNBA champion Renee Montgomery, now a vice president and part owner of the Dream, welcomed her publicly with immediate excitement. Fans immediately began buying Reese jerseys in Atlanta. There were serious conversations online about whether the Dream would need to move from Gateway Center Arena, a venue that holds only 3,000 people, to State Farm Arena, home of the Atlanta Hawks, which seats nearly 17,000. And that's the kind of impact she carries. That's what Chicago just gave away for two picks. When ESPN broke the news mid-broadcast, it wasn't just the basketball community that stopped to take notice. It was a full cultural moment. And Stephen A. Smith, who has never been accused of holding back his opinions, made his position crystal clear. He wasn't conflicted. He wasn't hedging. He said Reese was a glue piece, described her as someone who is very, very capable, and pointed directly to the contrast between what she was leaving and what she was walking into. Chicago won 13 games in 2024. They went 10-34 in 2025. Atlanta went 30-4 last season and finished with the third-best record in the entire WNBA. Smith said it without blinking. The move puts Reese in a winning situation and the Atlanta community is going to fall in love with her. He also pointed out that the Dream gave up 2 first-round picks to get her, which means whatever narrative Chicago was selling about the trade value being fair, Atlanta clearly didn't agree. They paid what they had to pay. They wanted her that badly. The fit in Atlanta is something analysts have been talking about since the moment the deal was confirmed. Reese is walking into a team built to win right now. She'll be playing alongside Alicia Gray, who finished 4th in MVP voting last season, and Ryan Howard, one of the most explosive guards in the league. Dream have made the playoffs in 3 straight seasons. They know how to win. Reese, who has never once played a postseason game as a professional, is about to experience what it feels like to actually compete for something in April and May. That alone could unlock a completely different level of her game. The physical tools have never been in question. She's 6 feet 3 inches. She has elite instincts around the basket, and she brings a motor and a competitive fire that you genuinely cannot teach. Only thing that was holding her back in Chicago was Chicago itself. Reese's response to the trade was everything you'd expect from someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. She posted on social media with the words, "An Angel's Dream," and tagged the Atlanta Dream account without a second of hesitation. In an interview with E! News, she said she really dreamed of this moment, described herself as loving in my Barbie dream house, and added that life is good, life is great, and she's excited for the new city. That's not the reaction of someone reluctant about a trade. That's someone who got out of a situation that was suffocating her and landed exactly where she wanted to be. She was gracious about Chicago, thanked the fans, posted a heartfelt video, but the energy in every word about Atlanta told the real story. She was free. What makes this situation even more layered is the timing. The Chicago Sky are set to host the WNBA All-Star game this summer, July 25th, at the United Center, one of the most iconic arenas in all of American sports, and they're going into that showcase event without their biggest star and having traded away the most recognizable face associated with their franchise just months before the league's biggest mid-season moment comes. To their city. The irony there is almost hard to comprehend. You're telling the story of the WNBA's explosive growth to the entire country. You're hosting the All-Star game and your franchise player is going to be on the court just wearing someone else's uniform. The Sky front office has essentially handed Atlanta a weapon and then scheduled themselves to watch that weapon go on display in their own building. If there was ever a definition of organizational malpractice, there's a broader story here too. One that goes beyond just the Sky and one trade. Angel Reese's journey from LSU to the WNBA was always about more than basketball. She changed the cultural conversation around women's hoops in a way that almost no player ever has. She walked into a league that was still fighting for mainstream attention and immediately demanded it on her terms. The Victoria's Secret runway, the Vogue cover, the NBA 2K26 cover. Only the second WNBA player in history to land on a global edition of that game. After Asia Wilson, the Met Gala host, committee a Hershey's sponsorship deal that made perfect sense given her last name alone. She built a brand that transcended basketball, and she did it while averaging a historic double-double for 2 straight seasons. Former Stanford player and broadcaster Rose Gold-Onward put it simply, there is no WNBA player that has transcended the game like Angel Reese. She can make anything cool. That kind of cultural reach doesn't come around often, and the Chicago Sky let it walk right out the door. There's a question that nobody in Chicago's front office seems eager to answer directly. At what point did they decide she was expendable? Because the statistics tell one story and the organizational behavior tells an entirely different one. You don't suspend a franchise player for speaking her mind and then act surprised when the relationship deteriorates. You don't cycle through coaches every single season and wonder why there's no stability. You don't put a woman who could be on the cover of Sports Illustrated in a strip mall and call it an introduction. Every single step the Sky took in Reese's 2 years there communicated the same thing, that they weren't prepared to match her standard, and eventually even 2 future draft picks was enough to make the problem go away. That's the real story. Not that Angel Reese left Chicago. It's that Chicago never actually built something worth staying for. Now the conversation shifts to what comes next, and this is where things get genuinely interesting. Atlanta has made the playoffs 3 straight years, but they've never been able to break through in the postseason. Bounced in the first round by Caitlin Clark's Indiana Fever last season. Despite finishing with a 30-4 record, Reese's addition changes the calculus entirely. You're adding a physical interior presence who can rebound, score, and defend in a way that the Dream have never had. You're adding a player who, by every account, makes teammates better through hustle and effort, even on her worst nights. And you're adding the biggest celebrity presence in the WNBA to a market that is absolutely ready to receive her. A city with energy, a culture that matches her personality, and a fan base hungry for something to believe in. If the Atlanta Dream make a deep playoff run this season, the conversation around Angel Reese is going to shift in a way that makes every Chicago decision look even worse. In hindsight, Stephen A. Smith called it immediately. No hesitation. And looking at all of it, the 2 years of dysfunction, the suspension, the coaching chaos, the strip mall introduction, the 10-34 season, the trade for 2 draft picks, it's hard to argue he's wrong. This wasn't a rebuilding move. This was an organization finally admitting it had no idea what to do with the player it had. Chicago gave away a two-time All-Star. He a two-time rebounding champion, the most culturally significant player in their franchise's history and the most followed athlete in women's professional basketball, all for a pair of picks that won't be cashed in until 2027 and 2028 at the earliest. By the time those picks come around, Angel Reese might have an Atlanta Dream championship banner hanging in a 17,000-seat arena, and the Chicago sky will still be rebuilding. Whether that future plays out exactly that way remains to be seen. The season hasn't even started yet, but one thing is already undeniable. The Bayou Barbie has a new home, a new city, and for the first time in her professional career, a real chance to win. And somewhere on a first take set, Stephen A. Smith is watching all of this unfold with a smile on his face. Stephen A. Smith was sitting on the set of First Take when ESPN stopped everything, cut right into the segment to drop a piece of news that had the entire WNBA world standing still. Angel Reese, the most talked about young player in women's basketball, was gone from the Chicago sky. Just like that, no warning, no dramatic press conference. One moment she's Chicago's crown jewel, and the next she's property of the Atlanta Dream. And when Stephen A. opened his mouth to react, what came out wasn't shock or outrage. It was something far more telling. He said he was very, very happy for her. That single statement said more about the state of the Chicago sky than anything their front office has said in years. And because when one of the most outspoken analysts in sports history reacts to your franchise dumping its best player with pure relief on her behalf, you have to ask what exactly was going on behind those closed locker room doors. Let's go back to where this really started, because none of this happened overnight. Angel Reese arrived in Chicago in 2024 as a generational talent. She came fresh off leading LSU to a national championship, already a household name, already a cultural icon before she'd played a single professional minute. She was Bayou Barbie. She was Vogue covers and Victoria's Secret runways and Met Gala host committees. She was the most followed player in the entire WNBA with over 4.6 million Instagram followers by early 2025. And on the court, she delivered immediately. As a rookie, you sure averaged 13.6 points and 13.1 rebounds per game. Broke the WNBA's all-time single-season rebounding record and earned All-Star selection. The expectations placed on her weren't unreasonable. They were exactly what a franchise should want a young star with elite production and a cultural pull no other player in the league could match. And Chicago absolutely squandered it. The cracks started showing almost immediately. The sky were a mess from the inside out. Coaching instability, roster dysfunction, a practice facility that multiple sources described as an embarrassment, a strip mall in Deerfield, Illinois, where Reese was literally brought to meet the media on the day she was drafted. That detail alone tells you everything. Here you have a 21-year-old who just carried a program to a national title. You who had already built a brand bigger than most WNBA franchises and the organization, greeting her at a strip mall. It wasn't just disrespectful. It was a preview of what was to come. The sky failed to build a roster capable of competing around her. Cycled through coaching staff,